Still with me in studio, John Jenkins, Group Executive at Business Development for the Private Sector at Business Connection, and Murray Steyn, Chief Commercial Officer at Vox Telecom. And joining us for the second half of the show, Angus Hay, Chief Technology Officer at Neotel. Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for being here. And Angus, welcome to you. Let's start off. I mean, we've really covered the basics when it comes to the economic development side of things and how it's been affected by ICT or broadband growth within countries. Give us your perspective and let's touch on the policy environment and if that is a hindrance or if it is assisting growth in the industry.
Well, we've recently seen a broadband policy. I mean, for many years we didn't have a broadband policy in South Africa. Now, there have been broadband policies in the US, in the UK, various countries have had broadband policies. The question is how is that really going to be implemented? So the government has set a target, and the target is the end goal is 100% broadband. So what we need to do is first understand what do we mean by 100% broadband. Does that mean every person has an actual connection? Or does it mean that every person has access to a connection? And then once we figure out what that target really means is how are we going to get to it. And there we need to look at the practical realities of South Africa. Already we have more than 60% of what is called broadband in South Africa is wireless. And I think in many instances around the world in developing countries, wireless is going to dominate. So we're going to see wireless as being the dominant means of broadband. That makes that goal achievable. So I think combine that with other things that need to happen on the policy front, like local loop unbundling, and then we might have a real shot at 100%.
Do you think that do we need to see both at this stage? Do we need to see the fixed line cable option? And as you said, most of it is going to be wireless focused, but should there be a fair balance between the two?
Look, frankly, there's very little that anybody can do about the balance. It's the market that determines what really sells. What the government can do is set a policy environment that encourages investment. And in rural areas, that really needs to be investment in wireless rather than wireline. And in urban areas, we need to make it easier to deploy infrastructure, to remove some of the barriers in terms of the permissions required and the processes that one has to go through to deploy infrastructure.
Murray, before the break, I know you mentioned that, you know, what is the economic case for fibre to the home, and you seem somewhat sceptical. Let's ask Angus his view on this, and I know that Neotel has been pushing and of course trying to change the environment here. Tell us about the economic viability, because you've got to look at the economic viability relative to the actual benefits at the end of the day.
I mean, the fibre to the home debate is going to be with us for some time. There are very few countries where fibre to the home is a dominant technology. There are a few. But the reality is that the dominant technology for broadband in the world still is DSL or copper wire. That combined with what we don't have in this country, which is cable TV. So those are the dominant technologies in fixed line broadband. That said, there are some countries where fibre to the home really has worked. Korea and to some extent in Western Europe. But what's needed for that is a different investment model. So we haven't yet deployed fibre to the home, but we would be very supportive of a business model that made it viable. So anything that makes it possible, and there are various concepts. We've come across a concept called homes with tails, where you amortize the cost of the last mile into the cost of the home. In other words, the investor in the home covers the capital cost of getting that last mile. That makes it viable. It's very, very difficult for a telco to roll out infrastructure ahead of any kind of orders for services and make fibre to the home.
So, Murray, are you convinced with that argument?
No, I agree with Angus wholeheartedly, especially because we don't have the population densities that the Koreas and the Western Europes have, which makes it all the more difficult for fibre to the home as a business case.
I see you agreeing there.
Well, it's fine for new development to pick up on what Angus was saying, but you know, there's the 1 million homes, the 10 million homes that already exist in areas that are battling to get basic electricity, basic water. And I can't see us stringing fibre. So, you know, we said earlier it's about the mix, and I think Angus is right. Where you've got the new developments and so on, and one can easily put that base infrastructure in, it's fine. But fibre to the home as a reality to every home for the next how many years here, even in Gauteng, I don't see as possible. It's going to have to be wireless or copper. And the copper's getting old.
Yeah, the copper is getting old.
The copper's getting old, and we're starting to see that becoming a problem.
Yeah.
So Angus, I mean, at the beginning of the year, we're talking about some of the key themes that should have happened already this year, and we spoke of the local loop unbundling. We're still waiting for that to happen. We're also waiting for the auction to occur as well. What is your sense with regards to the policy aspect and whether government is cognizant of the economic benefits of ensuring that there is a broadband policy in place, as you mentioned, but also there's a way to implement it and plans ahead and targets that need to be set?
Yeah, I think to come back to the policy point, about the local loop unbundling is not about the operators. It's never been about the operators. It's about competition at the services layer and delivering services to the customer. And I think that's what really needs to be at the heart of the way that it's driven. So it's going to be a tough battle, and certainly we would support the regulator in whatever battles they have to fight to ensure that they can get local loop unbundling to happen. But what is important is that it is focused on creating competition. And so long as it's creating competition, you will see the kind of thing that we've seen to some extent in the wireless space. We've seen competition now biting with for example, mobile data prices. You know, now that we've got 4 or 5 players all in the market for wireless data, we're really seeing some change in price. Yeah. The same thing will happen in local loop unbundling, except with local loop unbundling, we might have 100 players if you get it in a very efficient service.
And can I add to what Angus was saying there? I think probably the most important thing to enable all of that is some certainty around the spectrum and around the unbundling process. That's really what an investor needs. But we've been beating on this drum for quite some time now. We all have, yes, that's right.
So when do you expect to hear clarity on that?
Well, we're supposed to be, there's a process going on at the moment. Comments are due by the end of this week. But the minister has set deadlines by, when is it, December 2011. Yeah. I think that's optimistic.
Minister Roy Padiat, you are waiting in anticipation.
But I mean, this competition, you know, the issue is, doesn't it just create more competition to create more people fighting over the same bone? But it's not answering the question of getting the access out to the rural communities and getting the access to where it isn't now. So what we're doing is we're spending all this time and effort to create competition over that same local loop that's already there, and we've still got half the population, maybe 70% of the population, with no access to the broadband or even to a reasonable
because the people that have access are just now enjoying faster speeds at this stage, and we still have people that just don't have access at all.
But the majority of the population in those metropolitan areas, that's where the economic growth is really going to come from. So there's nothing wrong with enabling them to do that, and we have some extensive competition.
But aren't you stymieing the rural areas? Because we actually see
there's another way of looking at this.
Okay.
There's another way of looking at this. And the problem we have is that many of these arguments, true as they are, I mean, they're absolutely true. The problem is that all they are is weapons in the hands of an incumbent operator to say, why should we do this? So it's certainly true that we've seen Telkom say exactly that. And if you think about it, it's not really an argument against local loop unbundling. It's an argument to deflect the attention away from local loop unbundling, to say, look, we're not going to get rural broadband out of local loop unbundling. That's absolutely true. But what we are going to get is jobs. Jobs, because the real beneficiaries, about 50% of the DSL users in South Africa today and going forward, are small businesses. Those are the engines of economic growth, and unfortunately they're in the urban areas.
Well, I mean, one would then argue, I mean, within the rural areas, and we actually know Telkom's ATA launch as well, they're actually focusing on ensuring that people do have connectivity in areas which didn't have connectivity before. And we could see small businesses really thriving within those areas. We know that Soweto is a very key focus for the likes of the ATA group as well. Do you think that we're just shoving certain areas aside because we're just focusing on the economic hubs? Meanwhile, if you do put an equal focus, you could actually see the rural areas jumping up as quickly as the previous areas.
Could you put an equal focus? I mean, the
could
economics.
You? And should we be? I mean, the economics at the end of the day.
The economics are true. I mean, you know, you can't argue with what Angus was saying. It's true that the problem is a lot of the economy and the growth is going to come, so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if we don't somehow find a model that creates that capability and drives it, you know, I'd love to be the spaza shop owner on the corner in a rural area having this discussion and saying, well, how am I ever going to be able to drive my prices down, get my logistics right, do my ordering on time, get things working, if I've got no capability to at least have access to the internet or do something. So we somehow have to find an answer to that model, because if everything just
isn't wireless the answer?
Certainly, I would say that
For the
wireless.
rural
In
areas?
fact, I would go further than to say just wireless, and I think it boils down to very specific spectrum. So the digital dividend spectrum, which is the 800 megahertz TV spectrum, which will be freed up, that is absolutely critical. There are enough examples around the world of how rural rollout can be done. I mean, frankly, we've had very good rural rollout of ordinary voice services in South Africa. There are very few places you can go in South Africa and not get a cell phone signal. To do the same with broadband, or to do the same with mobile broadband, we need more spectrum. And we need more spectrum
So
in specific
spectrum is
bands.
actually the biggest hindrance.
Spectrum is the hindrance there, yes.
So in other words, government needs to fix that, right?
Correct.
We're back
Provide some
to
certainty
the
around
drawing
that.
board.
Yes, yeah. There's no certainty around the whole spectrum.
I think I'm quite
process.
perplexed that we actually haven't seen clarity and certainty, because the point is that government needs to be focusing on the rural areas. It needs to be focusing on how we're going to start creating economic hubs within those rural areas, so that we don't see massive urbanization, that we create economic hubs out of the Gauteng region, for example. Who'd like to tackle that one?
Well, I can
Yes.
just comment on why I think there's been a delay. I mean, there are multiple reasons, but it's not simply a question of not wanting to do it. I think there is a problem with the underlying policy. In other words, what do you want to achieve? And I think this has been a challenge all along with spectrum. The government has certainly stated that it is keen, so we heard from the Minister of Communications that they are keen to introduce more competitors into the market, but at the same time they don't want to disadvantage anyone who's being successful. So the big mobile operators can't be
But is
disadvantaged.
competition a big hindrance, or is it the policy, the
No,
underlying
it's,
policy?
in other words, how do you choose? So how do you decide who gets the spectrum? And I think that's really been the challenge. So there's been talk of auctions. The auction process was thought about for a while. There's some uncertainty now whether an auction is appropriate. What's really needed is a government policy to say, we want the following operators to operate in the following way, in the following areas, and we're going to create a process to license them. That would be clear.
Okay, so we need to wrap things up. John, let's start off with you. Give us a sense about the challenges and the hindrances and also the opportunities within the space that you operate, and how the environment could have looked different if we had an environment that perhaps suited or created an appetite for more growth.
Well, we think that in Africa and within the rural communities of Southern Africa, the model is only going to play out with access. And access we see there is going to be mobile largely. What we see, though, is that one has to come up with solutions that enable us as a service provider to deliver the services via the broadband, via the normal copper, and via a mobile, in order to touch the wider base. And if we can be smart enough in finding those solutions that can spread across those, then we'll be able to enable more people and enable more growth. But if we don't find those solutions, we're going to see this widening, and I think even further, where people will only see their chance for survival and being able to do this by getting back into the major cities, and that's what we don't want. So we have to find a balance somehow.
Absolutely. Murray, very quickly.
Yeah, we're an innovative bunch of people, and I think the limits on access have been a severe constraint on our economy, and we need to get decent access and as far as possible to unleash the creativity and the opportunities.
Angus.
Yeah. No, I think there's no doubt. I mean, the broadband is an enabler. In fact, I think the real surprise is going to be what we're going to be able to do with it. At the moment, I think most South Africans really don't appreciate what's possible with real broadband. And I think as we see the combination of fiber services, the more advanced copper services, and also the fourth generation of mobile, which will make for much faster speeds, much higher speeds. As we see that starting to happen, we're going to see a very different way of using broadband.
Fantastic, gentlemen. We have to leave it there. Great to have you on the program. Well, that's all we have for you on this month's edition of Telco Talk. Until next month, from Yeleni Jokos, it's goodbye.